Hello, 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 hello. Welcome to the Connected Wellness Podcast. I am Rachel Ann. I'm here with Marianne and a lovely special guest that we'll introduce in a second. And we are all so passionate about wellness.
Here in this podcast, we look at the ways that our physical, emotional, and spiritual health is all connected and how we can take better care of our whole selves holistically so we can live our best lives. We're really excited that you're here with us on the journey. Welcome to episode 34 of the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Yes! Thanks for being here, y'all. Ooh,
Yes,
I'm so
and
excited.
so excited to have a new guest, Tara. So, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this.
Yes.
Yeah, this
Tara's
is
so
very
cool.
necessary topic, as you guys will hear about in a little bit, and it connects with so many things that we've been talking about recently. So, Rachel Ann, why don't you tell us a little bit about Tara?
Yeah, so Tara is my friend. That is how I know the lovely Tara, but she has an official bio, y'all. So I'm gonna go be real official and tell you all the greatness that she is. So Tara Hughee is a New York-based therapist with a degree in pastoral counseling and spiritual care. Y'all, that means that she knows a lot of things when it comes to our emotional wellness and our spiritual wellness. We praise God. She is the founder of Tara Hughee Mental Health Counseling, and she serves as a clinical supervisor. Through her studies and work, she emphasizes the importance of supporting one's mental, emotional, and spiritual health. Tara's self-care outside of her diverse work and experiences include cooking New York Times recipes, spending quality time with her loved ones, and taking an obnoxious amount of pictures of her cat named Titus. So that is a little bit about Tara. I love her cat named Titus. Everyone should follow her on Instagram so you get to see Titus because he is so cute and so funny. But a
He really
huge, big
is.
welcome to Tara on the Connected Wellness Podcast. We are so, so happy that you are here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this topic. I talk about it all the time. And so I'm just excited to see how things will flow today.
Yeah.
So wait, I don't think we've told the listeners what the topic is. So the
Oh, my
topic,
bad.
Yes.
yeah, that we're all excited about is boundaries, right?
Mhm.
So like for example, our last episode was on social wellness, and a lot of the things that we talked about was the balance between, needing to be in community, needing to spend time with others, but also needing to have time for ourselves, right? So
Yeah.
this boundary, is what we need to create a balance, right? And there's so many things in wellness that are all about balance. And I think that balance comes from boundaries. And so many of us have a difficult time with that. So that's why we're really excited for this conversation. But first, guys, we have to do our wellness wins.
Yes.
Anyone want to start? Okay. Okay, I can start. We won't make Tara start. I'll start. And then you guys just jump in. Usually, like, people are more excited for wellness wins, but okay. All right. I'm excited for mine. So, I know by the time this episode comes out, Lent will be over for a lot of people. But as an Orthodox Christian, I'm still dead center of Lent. We have a long way to go. So what I am calling my wellness win is I've finally created a good routine for where I can fit in a decent amount of quality time with God during my day. And I'm really excited that it's finally working, because for me, consistency, I think, is the only way to achieve anything. And now that I've found a time and a way and a place that it works, I'm hoping it can stay beyond Lent and just be a new habit. So yeah, it's been going well the last couple of weeks. And I'm excited about that.
I love
That's so
that.
good.
Can we know a little bit about it, or does that need to be its own podcast episode?
Yeah, no, it's not secret, and it's not that long. So Chris and I, my husband, we have to do things together. That's just how it works. If it's a time when we're both at home, we need to be coordinated. So we both decided that if we focus on going upstairs at 8:30 p.m., right, way before bedtime, and we each go to our separate places and we have our quiet time at that time before we get ready for bed, that it works. So it's just now I look at the clock, 8:15, I'm all right, anything we need to do pack lunches, dishes, like anything else we need to do downstairs, we need to get it done like it's time. And I am a very scheduled person, so it works really well for me
Mm.
having that scheduled time and just like using
Mm.
the clock as like my trigger that this is the time to go, and engage in this new habit. So yeah, and then we each have our quiet places, and I'm not going to go into
Mm.
what I do during that time, but that's been working out.
I
That's
love
awesome.
that. Oh,
Yeah,
that's really
thanks.
sweet. My New York brain was like, "Oh yeah, you have an upstairs and a downstairs in New
Yeah,
York. That's
yeah,
not a thing." One day,
yeah.
one day.
Hashtag
But
suburban
I,
life. Yes.
yes,
Mhm.
oh, I love that.
Awesome.
Tara,
Thanks.
would you like to share yours, or would you like me to go first?
Sure, I can jump in.
Yeah.
So my wellness win has been sisterhood.
Mm.
This past month, so my apartment has kind of been, I've been calling it Tara B&B, in that I've had a lot of visitors this month. I've had both sisters. So, fun fact, I'm a middle child, and probably in this podcast, you will be like, "Oh, bet I see why." So I am the middle child between two sisters, and this month, it was wonderful having them both visit me, but at two different times. So I had one sister
Mm.
staying with me, the other one left, and then the other one came, and it was great to have that one-on-one time with each of them.
Mm.
Thinking about how when we were kids growing up, we were just all lumped together, and we were all just bickering and all that stuff. But
Mm.
to come into adulthood and getting to know one another as adult women, and to still not only love each other but like each other as people, I think it's such a beautiful thing to like not only love your family but like them as
Yeah.
humans. So I really had my relational cup filled spending time with them. They've
Mm.
just grown to be such amazing women, and I look up to them in so many ways. So that was a big, big win for them, just that quality time.
Yeah, that's
I
beautiful.
love that. Oh, how
Thank you.
sweet. Tara B&B. That's awesome. um, so my wellness win is that my husband has been traveling. If y'all know my husband Brandon, he does 5 million things. And so he did a little bit of traveling for work, and then shortly after he did a little bit of traveling for school. He's in a doctoral program. And so he was gone for like a steady like 2.5 weeks, pretty much back to back. And I love my alone time. I am fine being alone, but I also really enjoy being with my husband. And so the wellness win is that he came back, and it was really great to see him again. I know that's a very cheesy wellness win, but it was nice to have that alone time and just kind of like settle in. And there's certain things that I like to like have organized in the kitchen, and I was like, oh, I can do this because Brandon's not here, so he's not going to be like, this looks weird. But even when he is here, I still do it, and he's like, that's fine. So it was really nice to have those alone moments, but I also am really happy that he's back. So it feels really good that the home is full again. It feels really
Yeah.
nice.
Nice.
Sounds like you had some
Yeah.
balance there, Rachel Ann, right? Alone time, husband time.
Yes.
Yeah, and you
Yes.
appreciated both parts. Like that's great. Yeah.
I
Yes,
love
and I
that.
really had to make sure that I did not overdo the social wellness because I think I forgot I was last episode or the episode before. I was like, y'all, I'm doing too much. I signed up for
Hmm.
so many social activities.
Yeah.
Let's not do this again. And so I was like,
Mm.
okay, cool. Like I learned from last time. Just because I am alone does not mean that I need to like fill up every single minute with a social activity. So
Hmm.
good job, Rachel. That's another wellness win
Win.
is that
Yeah.
I am doing social wellness balance in my life. So
Yeah.
That's
yay,
great.
Rachel.
Nice. Well,
Yay.
great job, guys. Yay, wellness wins. Yeah.
Yay.
um, okay. How are we going to start this? Tara, you're going to be our
Whew.
expert here. So how are we going to start this conversation about boundaries?
Well, me, the expert on boundaries. That's my therapist would love that. She's done so much work with me on boundaries. Well, maybe the first question is like, what are boundaries? Because I think
Mm-hmm.
we've we've seen so many therapy clinical terms thrown about when it comes to boundaries, the ways that they've been misused. So I think
Mhm.
first and foremost, what are they? What are
Mm-hmm.
boundaries?
Yeah, let's start there, girl.
Mhm.
What are they?
Yeah. Yeah,
Teach
so
us, help us.
I like to think of boundaries as relational expectations. They are the standards, the expectations that allow us to feel safe in our relationships, that allow us to be the fullness of ourselves. And at the same time, I also like to see boundaries as, defining where I end, where I begin and end, and where you begin and end.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
A lot of that can be determined in like what is my responsibility and what isn't my responsibility. What's your responsibility and what is not your responsibility. So much like when people talk about like, well, you made me feel this way. Well, no, my emotions are my responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
mm,
Um, just like yours are your own. And what we can have a conversation around boundaries and responsibilities is when it comes to our actions and all that good stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where I like to start with boundaries. It's what are your expectations in order to feel safe and healthy in your relationships?
Mm-hmm.
wow. I love that part where it's like something ends and then another thing begins. So there's
Mm-hmm.
this idea of, it's not so much like a wall, but maybe like a gate. And it's just like there's an open and close to that. There's
Right.
like a sense
Mm-hmm.
of a little bit of flexibility, but more so like this is like a strong thing. It is
Mm-hmm.
sturdy. And when something happens, it will open. And when something happens, it will close a little bit again.
Mm-hmm.
That's the image that came to my mind when you were talking about boundaries. And I never heard it. Yeah, I never heard it explained that way. So thank you for
Yeah.
explaining it in a very like real, easy to understand way.
And it
Yeah.
sounds
Yeah. No
like it
problem.
protects our sense of self too, right? Because again,
Mm-hmm.
if you say this is where I end and you begin, if I don't have clear boundaries, then like, who am I? Like I'm just going to blur with my surroundings and with my community and with the people around me. And sometimes those people are toxic and not good for me, right? So those boundaries
Mm-hmm.
are very self protective. Yeah. So it sounds like super important. But I think a problem is that some of us are just not used to having boundaries and we kind of don't know
Mm.
where to start. And maybe a good question is, are there some universal boundaries? Because it sounds like what you said, to feel safe in your relationship, that can differ from person to person. So are
Mm-hmm.
there kind of
Mm-hmm.
some universals that everybody should have these boundaries? These are healthy for everyone?
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say there will be some nuances. Certain things because of your life experiences, certain boundaries are going to be a lot more firm than
Mm-hmm.
others.
Mm.
So I like to often break them down. This is actually inspired by the book Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend. They break it down about like our physical, our mental boundaries, our emotional boundaries, and our spiritual boundaries. So I feel like it's good to sort of start there.
Mm.
When we think about, physical boundaries, the respect of like the aspect of who can be within my physical space, who can and cannot touch me. I think one of the main things, a universal boundary, is like you don't go like hitting people. So
Mm.
that's like one, but also there's nuances to it, which
Mm.
is, let's say, when it comes to hugging. So for me, I'm not the biggest hugger, but there's nuances to it because I hug certain people. So like certain friends, certain relationships, I'm cool with hugging, but like sometimes I might not initiate said hug. I think about one colleague of mine that was leaving, a shared workplace, and I was just sort of congratulating her on her next step. And I asked her, I said, are you okay with hugs? And
Mm.
she said, thank you so much for asking, because she's like, I'm not. She's like, I don't
Mm.
like hugs. I was like, that's cool. And we fist bumped and we said, wish you, wish you well.
Yeah.
So to your question, it's hard to say if certain boundaries are universal, but I think there are some that are going to have nuance, and I think there are some that we can think of that speaks to honor and respect of
Mm-hmm.
people when we think of, especially as believers, with all of us being created in the image of God, like there are certain boundaries and certain expectations that we should uphold when it comes to treating a human being
Mm-hmm.
created in his
Mm.
image.
Wow. I appreciate you bringing up that hug example because I forgot there was a time when I was about to hug someone and she was like, "Oh wait, no, I don't actually like hugs." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." And that's when I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, "Oh wow, like Rachel, you should be thinking about how your body's interacting with other people's bodies. Yes, like you're
Mm-hmm.
not punching people, which is great. We should continue to not punch people. But also,
Facts.
we don't know someone's history. We don't know what somebody's experiencing in their body. Maybe it's uncomfortable, maybe there's pain, maybe they just don't like hugs. So I
Mm-hmm.
think thinking about it at the micro level is a really good reminder. And it makes me, I don't know, it makes me wonder for, like, for example, for a lot of us and the listeners, we are Christian, we are people of color, we are children of immigrants. So I don't really know if I'll speak from the I never really learned like what a boundary was growing up. That was not really something that's like normalized in my culture or even in like my space now and in the world and all of that. So do you have any thoughts about how to learn when you need to set a boundary, or like what is a question to ask yourself to say, what does a boundary look like for me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think when we even think of like experiences of childhood, it's
Mm,
tough. So at first, it makes sense that we would have these questions of even where to start, because I think
mm,
unfortunately for many of us, when for many when they were young, like it's for children, I think especially with children, if we're thinking in particular with like engagement with family members, it's sort of like you go hug your relative, go say
yeah.
hi, so at a young age, the idea of having agency, it's like, what is that? You do as you're told, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to break out of that. Very often, the folks that I work with come to a point where they've reached that point of exhaustion, where they've reached
Mm,
that point of, unfortunately, resentment. So I like to often start with, what are the areas like that they're really especially giving and overexerting and really yielding themselves too much, that they'd like to see change. So
mm,
sometimes it's in those tender places that maybe that's the place to start, because that's the place that we
mm,
really need some care.
Mhm.
mm.
Yeah, the word
Wow.
resentment, I resonate with that because that's when I know I need to set some boundaries is when things that
Hmm.
are important to me, obligations, service, whatever it is that normally I care very much about, when I start to become resentful because I'm just, like
Hmm.
you said, overextended, tired, that's when I realize, wait, I think something needs to change. And that's
Mm,
sad because it's, again, things that normally you may enjoy your work or you may enjoy these certain relationships, but the lack of boundaries makes you become, or at least me, makes me become resentful of them, and instead of looking forward to things, you're just like, ugh, the thought of doing whatever it is, so that's huge. And for me, I noticed that for sure. And it's like a great
Hmm.
little kind of red flag. Hey, something needs to change.
mm,
Yeah, yeah, that there are parts of me right now that need protecting. The part of me that loves to serve, at church,
mm,
needs protecting, because this is a part of me that I've loved and really enjoyed. And I'm noticing that there's a cringe now
Mm.
when I'm being
mm,
asked to do that. That there was a point in where things shifted
Hmm.
for me. So yeah, so it's when the things that we generally would enjoy sometimes becomes like a chore.
Hmm.
mm. Wow.
Go ahead.
I saw Mary
Yeah,
Ann
go
about to
ahead,
say
Rachel.
something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Something that I'm thinking about is like in my own journey, but also in conversations that I have with other people, the beginning process of setting boundaries. I think there's a lot of questions of like, is this even reasonable? Does this boundary make sense?
Hmm.
Am I being too much? Right.
Hmm.
Again,
Hmm.
being people that come from a collectivistic culture and a collectivistic religion, it says that we care for our neighbors so well and so beautifully that sometimes we don't even think about ourselves as much as we should.
Hmm.
I could see it being really difficult to say, okay, I know I need to set boundaries, but how do I know if my boundaries are reasonable? It could be really scary to set boundaries, and to start to think of yourself in the I if you've been thinking about yourself in the we for so long. And how do you do that together? that was really existential. So I guess to kind of land the plane in more practicalville is, how do we know that our boundaries are reasonable? Like, are there
Mhm.
things that we can ask ourselves to make
Mhm.
sure that it like makes sense and it's legit?
Yeah, yeah. I like what you laid out before about seeing it as a fence.
Mm,
And it's actually in that book, Boundaries, that I first referenced. That was such a game changer for me, which was seeing boundaries as a fence and not as a
mm,
wall. When you
mm,
think of a wall, we can't penetrate a wall. Like nothing's coming
Mhm.
in, nothing's coming out. They're rigid, they're cold, and that's that.
mm,
Um, but with seeing our boundaries as a fence, it's okay. I have the choice of being able to be flexible if it's still like honoring, of myself, of the relationship. And I can open, I can close it.
mm,
So it's not, I think operating in the tension between being firm yet flexible.
mm,
And so if the boundary is, let's say, I'm going to think of one um, that, oh, I never allow my friends to be late when we hang out. Like
mm,
that's pretty firm.
Mhm.
Okay. Now mind you, if let's say living in New York, delays happen. So maybe it's maybe it's the sense that, okay, if there's at least a communication that you're running late, or that I give like a grace period, of
mm,
some time, that okay, that could maybe be my boundary. Because at the
mm,
same time, we don't want to then say, all right, it's an hour and I'm still waiting on my friend to show
Mhm.
up. So I like to think of it as a question of like, can it be firm and at the same
mm,
time flexible based upon the relationship, the circumstance? If I were to say, oh, no, I'm never allowing my friends to be late, but my friend had an emergency, or, that they had to attend to their children, is that allowing for at least some compassion and
Mhm.
some wiggle room there?
Yeah.
mm,
And then there are some relationships where we need to be a little more firm. So, based on what the history has been. So yeah, so that's how I would ask myself if my boundary is reasonable.
mm,
And I think also just being clear about our communication as well. Something that was shared with me uh, by my own supervisor, she talked about how when it comes to boundaries, we cannot issue a consequence without a warning.
wow.
Mhm.
So
That's
it's
good.
one thing to say, oh, like, I have this boundary, but I didn't tell you what would happen as a result,
Mhm.
you
Mm,
know? So then it doesn't leave the person with informed choice then. So if I say, hey, if I don't hear back from you in 15 minutes, I'm out,
mm,
at least like if I communicate that, they know. But if I don't
mhm,
communicate that and they show up and they're like, where are you? And it's like, well, you were late, so I don't know what to tell you.
Mhm.
um,
mm,
it's we're issuing this consequence without allowing them to say, okay, at least like I know what Tara's expectation was regarding this, so I'm not blindsided by it.
Yeah.
mm. Wow, that reminds me of something that I heard. My husband and I did premarital counseling, and our counselor said that one reason why you want to overly communicate is because a lot of the times we have unwritten or unspoken
Mm,
expectations,
Mhm.
but we're still holding those expectations about that person, but we're not communicating them, and then we feel frustrated when they're not meeting the
Mhm.
expectation. It hasn't been communicated. But when you do communicate it, it allows them to say, oh, I understand. These are the questions that I have about it. I don't know how realistic it is for me. What do you think we do like XYZ, right? There's a whole conversation to
mhm,
make sure that, I hate this term, but there's a buy-in, that there's like an understanding that this is what it is. So wow, I really like
Mhm.
that
mhm.
example.
Yeah, because I mean, unmet, uncommunicated expectations, that's like the breeding ground for the
Mhm.
resentment.
Yep.
It's that I'm holding you to a standard that you're not aware of.
Mm,
and I'm expecting you to read my mind.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm saying yes to a favor, to an ask, when I really mean no, they can only act based upon what I'm telling them and what I'm showing them.
Yeah.
So it really is about how can we learn to be our best advocates.
Mm.
And a lot of that, I think, is courage, especially, as you were, sharing about a lot of the folks that listen to this podcast. If you're, taking that step in setting boundaries when that has not been your norm, your family's norm, it is going to take courage.
Mm.
I'm a big clarifier in when it comes to my communication. Like, if you say yes to a thing, I'm like, okay, yes, and like, is this still okay? And is that, and how you feel about that? And we're both going to meet at
Yeah.
this time, at this bench, like at this place. Okay, I'm just making sure. And we both, and on this date, yes. Because there's so much of like communication, which is like what you hear and the meaning that you make of what you hear.
Mm. Ooh, girl. Can you side route? Can you talk about that? The difference between like what you say and what that person hears? Because I think that's where a lot of communication breakdowns happen.
Yeah. Another sort of tool that I took a training some time ago in like couples therapy. And there was this exercise where one partner was sharing like a wish that they had for their relationship. And then the other
Mm.
partner was to share what they heard. And so one
Mm.
was saying like, oh, I wish that we could spend more time together. You're always at work and, I barely get to see you. And then the other partner responds, so you just don't want me to work? So it's just like,
Yeah.
no, something did not get,
Mhm.
get translated. And so
Yeah.
sometimes we can make meaning based upon like trauma that we've
Mm.
experienced. We can make our own meaning based upon like our defenses. We can
Mm.
make meaning based upon like a number of different contexts that we come from.
Mm.
And so it's important to add that clarity, and to also make sure that whoever is on the receiving end of what you're saying understands. So it
Mm.
might sound sort of like elementary to say, and like, what did you hear me say?
Mhm.
I wouldn't exactly say it like that, but to reflect back, like, and what did you hear from what I said?
Mm.
How are you understanding that? I want to make
Mm.
sure that you're getting the heart of what I'm saying. So
Mm.
sort of like the difference between like the intention and impact. Like, how is this landing with you?
Yeah.
Mm.
So I'm
Wow.
hearing that there's fact and then there's perception. And
Oh yeah.
unfortunately, perception is all that matters, right? The facts don't necessarily matter. What I actually said, what I meant, don't really matter if you perceived it a different way. So yeah, that's huge. So to take a little bit of
Hmm.
time for clarification, I think that's something.
Hmm.
Also, there can be the fact that my boundary is reasonable, my boundary is healthy, right? But someone may perceive it as selfish or, mean or, whatever it
Hmm.
is. And that's difficult. That's the courage that you were talking about,
Hmm.
especially if we're not used to it. Or we are recovering people pleasers and we don't like people to be mad at us, that's a very difficult
Yeah.
thing to deal with.
Hmm.
So I kind of want to say, and I know this is very idealistic, especially for me, that we shouldn't care how we're perceived, right? It does,
Mm.
like I can do my best if it's an important relationship, to me, I can do my best to make sure that they understand, that I clarify, right? But if they insist on perceiving that as selfish, what am I supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think?
You know, the recovering people pleaser in me is like,
Yeah,
oh,
right.
how?
I think all of us, right,
But
have a little bit
it's
of
real.
palpitations.
Yep.
Like,
Everything is fine. Everything is
not
fine.
caring, not caring what people think.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that, because especially when I can't tell you how many times I've said it in learning boundaries, and also folks that I've worked with in setting boundaries have said, I feel bad,
Mm.
Mm.
and or I feel mean in doing
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
But ultimately, for anyone, I say this, for anyone who is a habitual line stepper, you're always going to come across as mean. Like, if
Yeah.
someone is always used to pushing, never respecting, your boundaries or the boundaries of others, you're always going to be seen as mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's no way around that, because they're being confronted in ways that they're not often confronted. And
Yeah.
so that's why I also like to say, for myself and also with the folks that I work with, that ultimately guilt is a manageable emotion.
Mm.
We
Wow.
can manage the guilt around that.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm.
feel like this conversation was so timely because I've been confronted with, a boundary that I've had to set in a particular relationship. And it's a relationship that meant a lot to me. Um, and I struggle with that because a lot of times we can lean on history, we can lean on good times, and at the same time, that can't be my only defining factor. That
Mm.
okay, that there was once a history that was good,
Mm-hmm.
because we have to now also sit with the present. My therapist often says, like, we got to be honest about what it is and not what we want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so we can wrestle with the guilt. We can wrestle with the grief, because that's what I think it ultimately is that these
Yeah.
boundaries can sometimes mark a shift in how I relate to people that I care about. If I was always, lending money to my friend because they needed it,
Mm.
but they weren't paying me back, like, okay, I got to keep my lights on too, and so,
Yeah.
to say no to them is like, yes, it's tough. We recognize and we have compassion for the ways in which, like, this friend might be struggling. But at the same time, like, that you also have to preserve yourself as well, or else we go back to that resentment.
Yeah.
So all that to say, like, when it comes to that guilt, it's wrestling with, again, understanding like where I begin and end, which is that my responsibility is not for my friends. I have a responsibility to the people in my life, but I'm not responsible for them in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that I have ownership over
Yeah.
them.
So, how
Yeah.
do
Wow.
we? You said guilt is manageable. Any
Mhm.
tips?
How do we manage
Yeah,
it?
how do you manage? I mean, is it just like take some time, and you get over it? Because I struggle with that a lot. I feel bad. That's
Yeah.
100% a refrain that I'm saying all the time. My husband hears all the time from me, and he's just like, ugh, you got to stop feeling
Mm.
bad, So, how do we manage that? Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I think it comes down to clarifying what our role is to be in the lives of others. I think sometimes that guilt can come about. We'll go again, like with that, let's say an example of like lending money to a friend, right? Um, if the friend says, oh, like, come on, like, I just need it one more time. I just need to borrow one more time. I'll pay you back for real this time. I just need to like take care of this bill. And then it sort of becomes like, oh, if I don't give my friend this money, how will they be able to like make calls? How will they be able to do all these things? And you start to realize I'm now becoming
Mm-hmm.
responsible for things that are ultimately not my
Mm-hmm.
responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It's the lines between where I begin and where they end.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm.
so some of it's a clarifying of like what our role is to be in the lives of, in others' lives. It's one thing if it's like your children. Okay, you have responsibility for your children because they are babies.
Mm-hmm.
But to other adults, as my mom would say, sometimes you got to let grown folks be grown
Mm-hmm.
folks.
Mm.
It's not exactly a clinical term, but it gets to the
Mm-hmm.
point. And so
Yeah.
I think with the guilt, it's getting curious about it, clarifying like what exactly is my responsibility to this person. What does it look like to be, to exist in this relationship where I can, yes, like honor them and also like be honoring of my needs as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times, like I find at least when I feel guilty, it's because I was very often like overstepping or exceeding what my responsibilities were
Mm-hmm.
in the first place. So
Mm.
so yeah, and so yeah, so I think it's sitting with some of those emotions too. I mentioned again the grief, that can come, because when it comes to setting boundaries, again, it can mark a change.
Mhm.
Whereas they were used to me in this particular light where my yes was always available to them. And so it might take some shifts and, some growing pains for them to get used to my no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
sometimes I think in the feeling bad, it can be, will this come at the cost of the relationship? And I think, speaking for myself personally,
Mm.
I like to keep it chill in my relationships.
Mhm.
Like, thinking about dating as well, setting boundaries in dating, it was like, oh, I want to be the chill girlfriend. I want to be the chill date that like does not set too hard boundaries, because I want to be easygoing. I don't want to be seen as having attitude or anything.
Mm.
And like, who did that come at the cost the cost
Mm.
of.
Mm.
And so it's realizing that sometimes people will walk away
Mm.
Yeah.
because they can't deal with our boundaries. It doesn't mean that it's unreasonable,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but I think it's also like, sitting with that. And that's hard, to think that it could come at the cost of the relationship entirely.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so lots on clarifying, lots on grieving, lots on courage in all of that.
Yeah.
I want to make sure we touch on this before we run out of time, because you did mention, both of you, about being Christian, right? And that's, I
Mm-hmm.
think, a big issue for me, and maybe a lot of people, when you think about the boundaries, is that, okay, if we are to be Christ-like, right? And we've talked about Christ, practice self-care. He took time out for himself. So we know that at this stage, at least here in this podcast, we are good with that. But it feels very difficult to figure out, okay, like, am I wanting to set this boundary with, for me, it's always service, right? Because I'm being a little bit selfish of my time? Or is it because it's truly a healthy boundary? Like, maybe I should give up more of my time and more of my energy because that's really Christ-like. So trying to figure out, where are the boundaries, or where are my efforts to be like Jesus? Kind of, where do they reconcile? Do you know what I mean? I don't know
Mm-hmm.
what you guys think about that. Am I the only one with that particular problem? I don't I don't know.
You're
No, not at
definitely
all.
not.
Yeah.
Tara, what do you think?
What comes to mind for me is a lot about stewardship,
Mm,
Mm.
um, and what it means to be good managers, healthy managers of like what God has entrusted with us, and that includes like our relationships. So actually, my boyfriend and I were reading Kingdom Stewardship by Tony Evans, and it's been really insightful, because I think a lot of times when folks hear about stewardship, they're like, money,
mhm,
like here's how to get rich quick in the church, and it's just like, no, that is not what this is. Um, it's about how can I better manage my time, my talent, my treasure.
mhm,
Mm.
And so when I think about how to like manage all of this, not wanting to be selfish, trying to create balance, and also trying to, uh, work towards modeling Jesus, I think about ultimately asking God, what does it look like for me to manage these areas well? Because I think it's also coming down to, we can't do all of this in our own strength.
mhm,
Yeah.
Any of this,
Yep.
any of
Yep.
this.
Yep.
And a lot of times when I've exceeded my responsibilities, it's because I was not in alignment with what God called me to do.
mhm,
I'm like, I'm
Mm.
saying yes to all the things like, Tara, can you volunteer here? Can you do this? Can you speak there? And I'm like, yes, 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 yes. Because all of these look like really good decisions. Um, but are they God decisions? Like, are they
Mm.
what God has ultimately called us to?
mhm,
And I think that's where we can sometimes, you know, struggle, because we're thinking that as Christians we always have to say yes, we always have to give, and yes, that's important. It's important to serve, it's important to give, and it's also important to be functioning in the places and the spaces that God has called us to.
Mm. That's real.
I've
Wow.
realized, but I think I still need to keep reminding myself of this, that if I do just keep saying yes, 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 it's ultimately going to be to their disadvantage, to whoever I'm saying yes to, because I cannot
Mm-hmm.
give my all to everything, right? It's just not going to be possible.
Mm.
So if I said no to this particular thing, they can find somebody who can like wholeheartedly say yes, right, and can really give that project their full attention and energy, which I just cannot, so I think it's just a different way to reframe that. No, it's really in everybody's best
Mm,
interest, honestly. Sometimes if I say no, if it's really
Hmm.
beyond my ability, my capacity at that time, yeah, a lot of introspection
Yeah.
and prayer too. Like you said, I can't do things on my own ability, and I need to be led.
mhm,
Like, God, what is it you want me to say yes to, and what is it that you want me to say no to? Because I don't know. I can't figure out for
mm,
myself, exactly what's best. Yeah.
Hmm.
mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm thinking about and I know we're wrapping up, so I'll say this very quickly. There's like a savior complex that we have as Christians. That's like we must say yes to everything because it has to be us. And that's actually out of alignment with what God wants us to do and to be, because we are not Jesus. I remember saying this to a friend of mine. She was like wrestling with how to set boundaries in this relationship, and I was like, in this relationship, it sounds like this person needs Jesus, they need a therapist, and they need a lawyer. You are not Jesus. You are not a therapist, and you are not a lawyer. And even if you were a therapist, and even if you were a lawyer, you are not their therapist. You are not their lawyer. So what they
Hmm.
actually need is not anything that you can actually do anything with, which is why you are so angry and exhausted all the time, because you're forcing yourself to be something that you're not. So unless God tells you to go to law school, I don't really know if we should be moving
Hmm.
forward in this way. And it's hard for us as Christians, and as people of color, because we are really good at thinking about the collective. We are really good at thinking about how
Hmm.
our actions impact other people. And we want the whole to be happy and healthy. We want the body of Christ to be happy and healthy and holy. And so it's like, well, if I just do my part, and then especially for a lot of us, we come from households or places where that was modeled to like sacrifice so much in that way, um, in a way that's potentially really unhealthy. So I say all that to say boundaries are not easy to set. They're not easy to maintain, as Tara has let us know. I have a hunch that people are probably going to want to hear more about boundaries, or they may have questions. So, Tara, is there a way that people can reach out to you or connect with you if they want to chat more?
Yes. So you can find me on Instagram, as you can find everybody these days, at Therapy with Tara, Tara. And you can also find me at my website. All my contact information is there as well, which is just tarahughee.com.
Awesome. Cool. I will link all of that down below. If you want to reach out to us specifically, you can reach out to Marianne on Instagram. She's at Wabasaba. I'm on Instagram at Brew with Rachel. And the podcast is on Instagram at Connected Wellness Podcast, and also on Facebook at Connected Wellness Podcast. If you want to email us, you can do that. You can email us at connectedwellnesspodcast@gmail.com. However we can support you in this journey, we want to be able to do that. And we strongly recommend having somebody like Tara in your corner to just cheer you on with the gospel, with what it means to have happy, holy wellness in your life. So thank you so much, Tara, again, for spending some time with us, for encouraging to think about boundaries in this way, for giving us the courage that we need. It was really, really helpful to hear your insights and your wisdom so much. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was great. I love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank
Oh,
you.
that's so
Appreciate
It
you.
awesome.
was really nice
Yeah,
to meet
appreciate
you,
you
and
both.
a great conversation. I agree. I'll be thinking about it for a while for sure. Yeah, so thanks everyone for tuning in, and until next time, be well.
Yes. Be well,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.